A 6-year-old girl knocked on the doors of a lonely mansion during a snowstorm in Colorado, asking for leftovers. In return, she promised something no doctor, no treatment, and no fortune could offer. "I can help you walk again." He laughed. And then everything changed forever. The snow began falling heavily around 5 p.m., just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the white-draped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Wind swept through the pine trees of Silver Pines, a private hillside enclave outside Aspen, Colorado. There, a grand stone and timber estate stood silent on a slope, beautiful, remote, and utterly lifeless. Inside, Lucas Barrett sat in stillness by the fire, his custom motorized wheelchair parked beside a tall window overlooking the snow-covered valley. The flames from the gas fireplace flickered against the pine-paneled walls, casting long shadows behind the leather-bound books and antique snowshoes mounted above the hearth. At 54, Lucas was a man who once had everything: fortune, fame, and the envy of Silicon Valley. 2 decades earlier, he'd survived a private plane crash that spared his life but severed his spinal cord. Since then, Lucas had lived without sensation from the waist down. He remembered the hospital ceiling in Denver, the sterile lights, the crushing realization that his legs no longer belonged to him. He'd tried everything: experimental stem cell therapy, neural implants, electrostimulation. Money had never been the problem. Hope, on the other hand, had run out long ago. Lucas requested solitude often, especially in winter. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had gone home early as instructed. The quiet, he claimed, helped him think. But the truth was simpler. He had nothing left to say to anyone. At 6:23 p.m., someone knocked at the door. Soft, deliberate, and startling. Lucas blinked. No one came up the private road this late, especially in a snowstorm. Delivery drivers used the back entrance. Friends had stopped visiting years ago. The knock came again, 3 times. A pause. Then, twice more. Lucas maneuvered his chair out of the study, down the hallway with walnut floors and past portraits of his military family. His father, a decorated West Point general, glared down from above the staircase, disapproval frozen in oil and canvas. He pressed the intercom beside the front door. "Who's there?" No answer. Lucas hesitated, then unlocked the security panel. The heavy wooden door opened with a mechanical groan. Standing beneath the porch light was the smallest figure Lucas had ever seen on his doorstep. A girl, maybe 6, brown hair in a lopsided ponytail, drenched boots, a frayed coat 2 sizes too small. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her hands clutched a thin cloth bag, but her eyes, bright blue and steady, didn't flinch. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "but I'm lost and hungry. My mom works at the clinic down the road. I tried to walk there, but the snow came too fast. Do you have any food you're not going to eat?" Lucas stared. No one had asked him for anything in years, at least not without a business plan or an ulterior motive. But this child wasn't bargaining. She was just cold and hungry. "You walked here alone?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She nodded. "From the bus stop. I thought it was close, but it's really cold." Lucas glanced down at the untouched dinner on his tray. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, dinner rolls. He opened the door wider. "Come in, sit by the fire. I'll warm the food." The girl stepped inside timidly, her soaked shoes leaving a trail on the thick rug. Lucas shut the door and wheeled beside her as she stood near the fireplace, eyes darting around the vast room. "What's your name?" he asked. Emily Dawson. I'm Lucas." Most people don't use my name anymore. He offered a wry smile. Probably because I haven't invited anyone in for a long time. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, not at his wheelchair or the limp legs beneath the blanket, but into his eyes. Without hesitation, she said, "Can I tell you something?" "You already saved yourself from freezing out there. Go ahead." She took a bite of warm mashed potatoes and spoke as if stating a fact, not a fantasy. "I think I can help you walk again." Lucas blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I helped a neighbor once. He couldn't speak for 2 years. I sang to him every day from our porch. One day, he spoke. Just one word, then more." Lucas chuckled, deep, hollow, not unkind. "You think singing can cure paralysis?" "I think," Emily said simply, "when someone believes in you, your body believes again too." He had no reply. For 2 decades, Lucas had heard every medical theory, every alternative method, every empty promise. But none had ever come from someone with cocoa on her chin and snow in her hair. That night, after Emily fell asleep curled up on the armchair, Lucas covered her gently with a wool blanket. He stood over her for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall. She looked peaceful, unafraid, as if she belonged. And for the first time in 20 years, Lucas Barrett felt something stir, not in his legs, but in the frozen cavern of his chest. His heart shifted. When Lucas woke the next morning, the world outside his window had become a still life painting, quiet, silver, untouched. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, blanketing the trees and driveways in soft, untouched layers. He lay in bed longer than usual, listening. The house was never loud, but now it felt different. Not just empty, but expectant. He wheeled himself out of his room and down the long corridor, half expecting the girl to have vanished, as if the night before had been a dream stitched together from loneliness and memory. But when he turned the corner into the living room, he saw her, Emily. She was sitting cross-legged on the large rug in front of the fireplace, humming softly to herself while drawing with a stub of pencil on the back of a grocery receipt. Her hair was still messy, but someone had tied it into a neater ponytail, likely herself. Beside her was a single mitten and a half-eaten apple. She looked up, and her eyes sparkled. "You're awake," she chirped. "I was going to make breakfast, but I wasn't sure if your fridge had normal stuff." Lucas chuckled softly. "Define normal." "Cereal, bread, peanut butter, not those tiny jars with gold lids." "I do have cereal," he said, rolling toward the kitchen, though it probably expired 3 years ago. Emily followed him, barefoot on the cold wood floor like it didn't bother her. "I brought you something," she said, holding out her cloth bag. Lucas turned, surprised. "You brought me a gift?" She nodded. "It's a thank you for the food and the blanket and not calling the police." He took the bag gently and opened it. Inside was a knitted scarf, unevenly stitched, faded red, and missing tassels on one end. "My mom taught me how to knit when we didn't have heat one winter," Emily explained. "That one's from last year. It's a little wonky." Lucas ran the fabric through his hands. It was coarse, mismatched, and worn in places. It was also the first personal gift he'd received in more years than he could count. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "It's beautiful." Emily beamed. As they sat at the kitchen island eating toast with strawberry jam, well, she ate, he watched, Lucas found himself asking questions he hadn't voiced in years. "Where do you live, Emily?" "South Glen Apartments, that big ugly building across the highway. We're on the 3rd floor." "Isn't that a long walk, especially in snow?" She shrugged. I've done worse. Besides, the buses barely run when the roads are icy, and Mom works the night shift now. What does she do? She's a nurse at the town health clinic. She works all the time. Lucas noted the way Emily's voice softened on those last 3 words, not with resentment, but with something else. Acceptance. A small child should not be that familiar with absence. Is she worried about you? She's always worried. About rent, her patients, me getting into trouble. I told her I came here, but she doesn't know you yet. That's why I wanted to meet you again today, so I could make sure you're real. Lucas smiled, touched by the simple honesty. And? I think you're real, she said, chewing thoughtfully. But I think part of you is still sleeping, like your legs. He looked at her sharply. She was watching him, chin on palm, eyes wide and knowing. Emily, my legs aren't sleeping, he said gently. They're broken. But maybe they're both, she replied. My grandma used to say when the heart gets too sad, it tells the rest of the body to go quiet too. Like the sadness echoes. Lucas leaned back. No doctor had ever put it that way, but no doctor had ever looked at him like this child did, as someone who could be mended. Emily slid off the stool and padded toward him. Can I see them? He hesitated. My legs? She nodded. I won't hurt them. I just want to know what kind of sleeping they're doing. Lucas sighed. Most people don't ask. Most people don't ask nicely. He couldn't argue with that. With a shaky hand, he pulled back the throw blanket covering his lap. His legs, once athletic and lean, now looked foreign, thin, pale, still, muscles atrophied from decades of disuse. He looked away. But Emily didn't flinch. She crouched beside the chair, reached out with both hands, and placed them gently on his right knee, over the fabric of his sweatpants. Her palms were small and warm. For a brief second, Lucas thought he felt something, not quite sensation, not quite pain, but presence. They're very quiet, she said, eyes closed, as if listening for something inside him. Like hush puppies in a nap. Lucas couldn't help but laugh. That's quite the medical diagnosis. Emily stood up. I don't know big words, but I know when something is sleeping it can always wake up, eventually. Lucas looked at her then, really looked. This wasn't just a clever child. She was something else, something older than her years, with eyes like winter sky and a soul like spring. Why do you think you can help me? He asked quietly. Because, she said, crawling back into her chair and swinging her legs, you want to walk again, but you don't know why yet. I've wanted to walk for 20 years. She shook her head. That's not the same. He frowned. Then what am I missing? Emily tilted her head. Wanting something just for yourself isn't how magic works. You have to want to walk, so you can help someone else. That's the rule. Lucas blinked. That's a big rule. She nodded. All the best magic has big rules. Otherwise, it's just tricks. Lucas stared at her in stunned silence. He, a man who had once debated world-class neurologists, now found himself schooled by a child holding a peanut butter spoon. And strangely, he didn't mind. Can I come back tomorrow? She asked, licking her fingers. Lucas didn't hesitate. Yes. Yes, you can. As she slid down from the stool and headed for the front door, Emily turned back with one last remark. Oh, and Mr. Lucas. Yes? You should eat more than toast. You're gonna need your strength." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a scarf, a spark of hope, and the faint, echoing sense that something very old inside Lucas Barrett had just begun to stir. It was just past 7:45 p.m. when the knock came, this time louder, sharper, and much more urgent than the night Emily had arrived. Lucas Barrett was in the study, trying to concentrate on an old engineering journal, but his mind kept drifting. He had replayed that morning's conversation with Emily at least a dozen times. The words that lingered most weren't the ones about his legs or sleeping muscles, but about his purpose. You have to want to walk, so you can help someone else. That's the rule. It echoed somewhere deep in the hollow chamber where his ambition used to live. The knock came again, fast, insistent. Lucas moved quickly, at least as quickly as a powered wheelchair would allow. The security cam near the front door displayed a figure standing on the porch, bundled in a puffy winter coat and holding something long and wooden. A bat? He narrowed his eyes, rolled up, and unlocked the door. Outside stood a woman, mid-30s, tall, eyes wide with cold fury. Her auburn hair was tied back, snow clung to her shoulders, and she was gripping a worn aluminum baseball bat like it was an extension of her spine. "You, Lucas Barrett?" she asked, voice low but taut. Lucas blinked. "Yes, may I?" "I'm Rachel Dawson, Emily's mother, and I swear to God if you touched her, hurt her, or even thought about scaring her, I will swing this bat so hard they'll need dental records to identify your bones." Lucas froze. Rachel stood on the threshold like an avenging angel in snow boots, trembling not from fear, but rage. Her cheeks were flushed, jaw clenched. He couldn't blame her. Emily had, after all, snuck into the home of a complete stranger, and now the mother had arrived, not with a police officer, but with a baseball bat. That, to Lucas, said everything. "Ms. Dawson," he said calmly, "Emily is safe. She came here on her own 2 nights ago, lost in the snow, cold and hungry. I didn't hurt her. I fed her. I let her sleep by the fire, that's all." Rachel didn't lower the bat. "She said you couldn't walk, that you lived alone, that you talked to her." "She talked to me," Lucas corrected, slowly moving his chair aside. "Would you like to come in? You can see for yourself." Rachel hesitated, eyes scanning the interior. Then reluctantly she stepped inside, bat still in hand. The warmth of the house enveloped her. The fireplace still glowed in the corner, and next to it sat Emily's scarf, neatly folded. Her small mitten lay beside it like proof that her presence had not been imagined. Rachel exhaled sharply, chest heaving, and the bat finally lowered to the floor with a soft clink. "I didn't know where she was for 6 hours, she whispered. 6 hours, Mr. Barrett. I thought she'd fallen in a ditch or been taken or—" Her voice cracked. Lucas looked at her then, not as a potential threat, but as a woman holding the unbearable weight of motherhood, poverty, and survival all at once. "I understand," he said gently, "and I'm sorry for the fear she caused you. Emily, she has a way of doing things on her own terms." Rachel gave a bitter laugh. "You noticed that already? I've barely known her 2 days, and I feel like she's already changed the oxygen in this house." Rachel ran a hand through her hair, more tired than angry now. "She's always been like that. She's different, old-souled, sometimes too brave for her own good." "Like showing up at a stranger's house in a blizzard," Lucas said dryly. Rachel looked him in the eye. "What exactly do you want with my daughter?" Lucas was silent for a moment. "I want nothing from her. But she gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Hope." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lucas gestured to the chair near the fire. "Sit, please. You look like you haven't eaten all day." "I haven't." He moved toward the kitchen. "You like chili?" "As long as it doesn't come in a can." "Then you're in luck. My assistant stocked the freezer with homemade batches last fall. I can reheat it. 2 bowls?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but I'm keeping my bat close." Lucas smiled. As the chili simmered and the aroma of cumin and tomato filled the space, the two sat across from each other in the soft firelight. Rachel tense, Lucas composed, both circled by the strange energy of an accidental connection. "Where's Emily now?" she asked. "With my neighbor. I didn't want to drag her here unless I had to. She'll tell you everything anyway." Rachel nodded. "She already has. She talks about you like you're some sleeping giant waiting to wake up." Lucas stirred his chili. "Maybe I am." Rachel watched him. "She's never taken to anyone like that. Not even teachers. She doesn't trust easy." "I didn't either. Until her." For a while they just ate. Rachel looked around the room. The leather-bound books, the quiet elegance, the absence of family photos. "You ever been married?" Lucas shook his head. "Kids?" "No. Why not?" He hesitated. "Before the accident, I thought I had time. Afterward, I thought I had nothing left to give." Rachel nodded slowly, as if confirming a hunch. "You were wrong." Lucas raised his eyes. "You don't know that." "I do," she said firmly. "Because Emily doesn't waste herself on people who are empty. She sees things, good things, in people who've forgotten how to look for it themselves." Silence fell again. Then Rachel stood and reached for her coat. "I should go. Thank you for the chili, and for not calling child services." "Would you consider bringing her back?" Lucas asked softly. "Not to fix me, just to talk." Rachel eyed him. "Maybe, but it's on my terms now. I wouldn't expect anything less." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Lucas?" "Yes?" She was right. "You're not broken. You're just stuck. There's a difference." And with that, she stepped out into the snow, bat slung over one shoulder, not as a threat now, but as a protector. Lucas sat by the fire long after she left, feeling something new unfold inside him. Not longing, not regret, but a subtle shift in gravity, as if life had just pulled him a few inches closer to the edge of beginning again. For most of his adult life, Lucas Barrett had lived by the rule of one problem at a time, one goal in sight, one barrier between him and the rest of the world. It was a rule built out of necessity, after the plane crash had stolen not just the use of his legs, but the illusion that connection was safe. He had streamlined his existence to silence and logic, wealth and isolation. But everything changed when Emily Dawson arrived with her own rule. You have to want to walk, so you can help someone else. The rule of 2. Lucas didn't know if he believed in it, but the child had returned, this time with her mother's permission, and her presence had already shifted the house's gravity. It was Saturday morning. Aspen was quiet. Snow had frozen into soft sculptures along the eaves of the house, and somewhere beyond the hills, the ski slopes buzzed with tourists and trust fund teenagers. Inside, the Barrett estate held a different kind of energy. Emily was sitting at the edge of the living room rug, cradling a small, battered ukulele. Lucas raised an eyebrow from his wheelchair. "Where did that come from?" "My neighbor," she said proudly. She said it's missing 2 strings and half a soul, but it still sings if you believe hard enough. Is that a technical diagnosis? Nope. That's a grandma quote. She strummed gently, and a surprisingly sweet, if slightly off-key chord rang out. I thought you were going to teach me to walk, Lucas said. I am, Emily replied. But first, you have to feel. And nothing wakes up the sleeping parts like music. Lucas folded his arms. And what makes you so sure? Emily looked up at him with a completely serious expression. Because music is what feelings sound like when they're too big to stay inside. He blinked. The girl was 6, maybe 7, but she spoke with the clarity of someone who had already loved, lost, and decided to keep living anyway. All right, he said. Professor Emily, what's the first lesson? She grinned. You listen, I'll play. She began strumming a rhythm, gentle, simple. A lullaby beat, like footsteps in snow. She didn't sing words, just sounds, hums, whispers, echoes that made the room feel warmer than the fire did. Lucas closed his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, he forgot about the weight of his own body, the silence of his legs. He wasn't moving, but something inside him was. When the music stopped, he opened his eyes. Emily leaned forward, her small hand reaching toward his. Did you feel it? She asked, voice soft. Lucas paused. I don't know. You don't need to know yet. You just need to notice. He stared at her hand resting on his knee, and then he felt something. A twitch, a pulse, a ghost of a nerve signal rising through the fog. It wasn't movement, not exactly, but it was different. It was life. He looked at her, eyes wide. Emily, he said hoarsely, did you see that? She nodded slowly. I felt it. You're waking up. Lucas's chest tightened, and not from fear, from hope. Again. The afternoon passed like something sacred. Emily played more, short, imperfect melodies that sounded like snowflakes hitting windows. Lucas talked for the first time in years, not in a business meeting, not as a CEO, but as a human being. He told her about his parents, his Navy pilot father, who never once said, I'm proud of you. His mother, who died when he was 23. His decision to build his first software company out of grief. Was it worth it? Emily asked between songs. Lucas thought long and hard. No, not if I had to lose myself to build it. She nodded like she already knew that. Later, Rachel came by to pick her up. She didn't carry the bat this time, just a quiet wariness that hadn't yet faded into trust. How was the music lesson? She asked. Lucas answered before Emily could. Transformative. Rachel tilted her head. You're not just saying that because she made you sing, are you? She didn't, but I did hum. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's a start. Lucas watched the two walk out into the snow, mother and daughter, coats too thin for the weather, hands clasped like they shared a private code. And he realized something. He didn't want them to leave. That night, Lucas wheeled into his private gym, a space he hadn't entered in almost 6 years. It still smelled faintly of leather and dust, the kind that settled on forgotten dreams. He parked in front of the hydraulic lift platform, a machine once designed to help him train his upper body. A decade ago, he'd tried it obsessively, hoping that muscle might substitute for faith. Now he looked at it differently. He placed his hands on the padded armrests and exhaled, and then, slowly, he imagined her voice. Nothing wakes up the sleeping parts like music. He hummed, not for anyone else, not to impress, but to remember what it felt like to be alive. And something flickered, not just in his nerves, but in his soul. The first sign of the storm was silence. It wasn't the kind of silence Lucas Barrett was used to, the kind he'd curated like a museum piece inside his mansion's stone walls. This silence was unnatural, thick, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. He'd lived through enough Colorado winters to know what that meant. And sure enough, by mid-afternoon, the radio crackled with alerts, a record-breaking blizzard approaching from the northwest, with wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour. Road closures likely, power outages probable. Lucas set the generator to standby and activated the in-floor heating in the guest wing, just in case. He didn't know why he prepped that side of the house. He hadn't hosted anyone in over a decade, until now. At exactly 4:10 p.m., there was a soft knock. Not frantic this time, not desperate, just familiar. Lucas opened the door, and there she was again. Emily, cheeks flushed, curls under a fleece beanie, and 2 wool socks pulled over her boots. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood Rachel, bundled tight, face pale. Lucas frowned. "What are you two doing out in this weather?" "I'm sorry," Rachel said quickly. "The shelter downtown filled up, power's flickering at our building. The clinic's on emergency staff only and, well, Emily begged me to come here." Emily piped up, "I told her you'd say yes." Lucas looked at the girl, then the woman beside her. There was fear behind Rachel's eyes, not just about the snow, but about pride, about asking for help when she was used to doing everything herself. He stepped back. "Come in, quickly." They entered like wind-blown birds seeking refuge, and Lucas led them to the kitchen where warmth rose from the heated floors. "Generator's full," he said. "We'll have power even if the grid collapses. There's plenty of food, and the guest wing is prepped." Rachel hesitated. "We don't want to impose." Lucas met her gaze. "Then don't. Just stay." A silence passed between them. A truce. Emily, meanwhile, had already kicked off her boots and was making a beeline for the piano in the great room. Lucas watched her climb onto the bench like she belonged there. "She's been practicing," Rachel said quietly. Lucas nodded. "I can tell." And then Emily began to play. It wasn't perfect. Nothing she did ever was. But it was pure, raw. Each note a footprint across the hush of the storm building outside. Lucas leaned against the door frame and let the music fill him. And that's when Emily did something unexpected. She stopped. Mid-melody. Hands poised above the keys, she turned to Lucas. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. Rachel, across the room, froze. "Emily," she warned. But the girl stood, walked to Lucas's chair, and held out a folded letter. Lucas took it with a curious glance. "What is this?" "My promise," she said, "to you. But I can only keep it if you say yes." Lucas unfolded the note. It was written in crayon. The handwriting was uneven, but the words cut deep. "Dear Mr. Lucas, I think you were meant to find us. I think your legs are asleep because your heart was lonely. If you let us stay, I'll sing to your legs every day. I'll make you laugh. And if you want, I'll be your kid for real. Love, Emily Dawson, not legally yet." Lucas's chest tightened. Something twisted in his gut. Not pain, not fear, but a breaking open. Rachel looked down, horrified. Emily, I told you not to. But Lucas held up a hand. It's okay. He turned to Emily, whose eyes searched his with complete sincerity. You want to be my kid? He asked, voice raw. Emily nodded. You don't have to be a superhero. Just someone who doesn't give up. Lucas looked down at his motionless legs. For 20 years he'd given up on them, but now, for the first time, he realized something deeper. He had also given up on people, on family, on connection, on being chosen. He blinked hard. Why me, Emily? She smiled. Because you listen when I talk, and you don't talk to me like I'm little. And because I think your heart is strong enough now to grow legs again. Rachel stepped forward. Lucas, I didn't know she wrote that. I didn't. Lucas turned to her, and what she saw in his face made her go still. He wasn't angry. He was breaking. In the best way. I don't know how to be a dad, he admitted. Rachel whispered, Neither did I know how to be a mother. But we learn. One emergency at a time. He laughed, a laugh that cracked something wide open. Then he looked at Emily and said, simply, I don't know what the law says, but in this house you already are my kid. Emily beamed. Outside, the first true howl of the storm roared through the trees. But inside, something far stronger held steady. A promise. The storm came down like a living thing. Winds howled like wolves circling the house. The windows creaked in their frames. Snow fell sideways, thick and relentless. And then, with a single electric gasp, the entire grid went dark. Emily, sitting on the stairs with her ukulele, let out a tiny yelp. Power's gone! Lucas was already on it. He rolled into the security room and switched the estate to generator mode. Lights flickered back on in the main quarters, but Rachel's voice from the guest wing called out, Basement's still dark. Lucas muttered, Only the core systems are wired to backup. We'll have to use candles for the rest. Within minutes, they were gathered in the living room around the fireplace, with 3 fat candles glowing on the coffee table. The snow was still piling outside the windows, but inside was warmth, laughter, and flickering orange light that made everyone's eyes softer. Emily had fallen asleep with her head on a couch pillow, the ukulele resting gently on her stomach like a sleeping cat. Rachel and Lucas sat opposite each other in the firelight, her hair unkempt from the storm, his wheelchair parked beside the old wingback chair no one had used in years. She trusts you, Rachel said, her voice soft. Lucas looked down at the girl. I trust her back. That's rare. He turned to Rachel. For her, or for you? Rachel exhaled. Both. She looked into the fire, silent for a long moment. Then, with a kind of aching bravery, she said, Lucas, do you want to know where Emily's father is? The question came like a thunderclap inside his chest. He nodded, slowly, carefully. Rachel didn't look at him as she spoke. I met him when I was 20, fresh out of nursing school. He was charming, wild, said all the right things and made promises with hands that never stayed. I got pregnant 6 months in. He vanished on month 7. Lucas kept his voice level. He left you? No. He ran from us. Said he couldn't handle a kid, couldn't handle me. He wanted freedom, and I was a chain. She laughed bitterly. He said he'd send money. He never did. Not once. Lucas clenched his hands in his lap. Rachel continued, more softly now. I moved to Aspen because I had a cousin here. She let me crash for 2 months. I took every job I could find, night nurse, day shifts, elder care. I learned to sleep standing up. And through it all, Emily never once cried at night. Not once. Lucas looked at her with new eyes. Not pity, respect. You built a world out of nothing. I built her out of nothing, Rachel said, finally meeting his eyes. And I'd do it again, 1,000 times. Silence stretched between them, the kind that asks for honesty. Lucas cleared his throat. I've spent 2 decades keeping people out, because it hurt less than letting them in. Rachel said nothing. I thought no one would ever come into this house again, he continued. No children, no love, no chaos. And now? She whispered. Now. Lucas glanced at Emily, then back at Rachel. I think I've been living in a blackout long before the power went out. That hit her like a wave. She blinked fast, looked away, then whispered, You're not the only one. He leaned forward slightly. Rachel, I need to ask you something. She looked back. Why did you bring her here that night? The storm hadn't hit yet. You could have gone to a shelter. Rachel hesitated. Then said the truth. Because she talks about you in her sleep. Lucas froze. She says your name like it's a prayer, Rachel continued. Like she's trying to wake you up. And I realized, maybe she's not the only one trying. Lucas looked at her, the flickering light painting her features with a kind of honesty rarely seen in daylight. And then Rachel said, You saved her that first night, but you're not done yet. Lucas swallowed. What if I fail? Rachel leaned in closer. Then we fail together. It was the most vulnerable thing either of them had ever said. Outside, the storm roared like a wounded thing, but inside, a different storm had passed. Rachel stood, picked up the blanket from the back of the couch, and gently draped it over Emily. Lucas watched her, not just as a woman surviving, but as a mother choosing trust over fear. Rachel looked down at Emily's sleeping form and whispered, She's never had a real home, Lucas. Not one with roots. Only places we pass through. Lucas didn't reply. But his silence said everything. This house, this fire, this night was no longer just a place. It was becoming a home. At precisely 5:43 a.m., Lucas Barrett was awakened not by alarms, nor pain, nor the sound of a winter storm dying down over the mountains, but by something else. A flicker. It started in his left thigh, a muscle memory from a time long buried under bone and bitterness. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't even strong. But it was there. A twitch, uninvited, alive. He sat up straighter in bed, heart pounding. He placed his hands on both legs and whispered aloud, Do it again. Nothing. Just stillness. But something had changed. It had to. Downstairs, the smell of coffee and eggs wafted through the old stone walls of the estate. Lucas wheeled himself into the kitchen to find Rachel standing barefoot in his oversized hoodie, humming softly to the old radio playing Sinatra. She looked up, startled for only a second. Morning. Lucas didn't respond. His gaze was somewhere distant, focused. She turned off the stove. What happened? I felt something, he said quietly. Rachel set down the spatula. What kind of something? In my leg. It twitched. Rachel blinked. Are you sure it wasn't? I know my body, he cut in, but his tone wasn't sharp. It was hopeful, like a man touching sunlight after years in a cave. Rachel took a breath. Lucas. That's incredible. He didn't say anything, just nodded, like he was still translating the moment. She walked to him, gently placed a hand on his forearm. That's not just your body remembering, Lucas. That's you choosing to come back. A long pause. Then Rachel smiled. Well, since we're celebrating tiny miracles, I made eggs, real ones. None of that powdered astronaut stuff from your pantry. He chuckled. I'd forgotten what real food tasted like. She paused. You're forgetting a lot of things lately. He tilted his head. Like what? Like how it feels to not be alone. Later that morning, Emily bounded in, hair still tangled from sleep, ukulele swinging from her arm like a knight's sword. Good morning, Muscles, she shouted at Lucas's legs. He grinned. They said hi. You felt it? She gasped. He nodded. Emily ran to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and whispered, I knew it. You're starting to glow. Rachel laughed. He's not radioactive, Em. No, Emily said seriously. He's healing, and healing makes people shine on the inside, like gold under skin. Lucas looked at her, and for the first time since the crash 19 years ago, he believed that maybe, just maybe, there was light left in him. But by that afternoon, the light was tested. Rachel stood in the foyer, holding her phone, lips pressed tight. Emily was upstairs building a healing fort out of blankets and pillows. Lucas noticed the change in Rachel's eyes the second she walked back in from the hallway. What is it? She hesitated. The clinic called. They want me back. The shelter nurse got the flu. They're offering full hours, plus a raise. Lucas swallowed. And? She looked at the fireplace, the coffee mug on the table, the shadows of Emily's bare feet near the couch. It's everything I asked for, she said. But not what you need? She didn't answer. Lucas rolled closer. Rachel, you don't owe me anything. If you want to go back to that life, I won't stop you. She looked down. It's not about the job. Then what? It's about not knowing if I should build something here, or run before it gets hard. Lucas said nothing, until he did. You built a life for Emily out of nothing. Don't tell me now that you're afraid of building one from something real. Rachel blinked fast. I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid I'll let her down again. Lucas's voice dropped. You won't. You didn't. And you won't. She looked at him, eyes wide, and then whispered, I don't want to leave. He reached for her hand, held it. Then don't. They stood there. A paralyzed man who'd spent years running in silence, and a single mother who'd never stopped moving long enough to be held, both of them, for the first time in years, choosing to stay. That night, as snow melted from the rooftops and the storm finally passed, Emily dragged Lucas into her healing fort. Sit here, she ordered. Right here, next to the lantern. Lucas maneuvered himself inside, bumping a blanket wall. It's not very wheelchair accessible. Emily grinned. It's not for wheels, it's for hearts. He chuckled. What's the password? There's no password, she said. Only a question. Which is? She leaned close. Are you ready to try? Lucas looked at the child who refused to believe in endings. And then he tried. He closed his eyes, focused every ounce of willpower on his left foot. and like a prayer with muscle behind it, his toe moved. He gasped. Emily clapped her hands. "You did it!" Rachel, watching from the hallway, had tears on her cheeks. In that tiny fabric fort, under a child's plastic lantern, surrounded by warmth and firelight and hope, Lucas Barrett took his first step back into the world. Not with legs, but with faith. The snow had softened into silence. A week had passed since the storm. Power had fully returned. Roads were cleared. Life in Aspen resumed with cautious cheer. But inside the Barrett estate, something far more profound had begun. A slow rebirth. Lucas Barrett had moved from wheelchair to standing bar. Twice now he had held himself upright for 6 seconds before collapsing into Rachel's arms. Rachel no longer knocked before entering his study. And Emily. Emily had made a sign for the front gate that read, "No sad people pass this point unless they want to get better." Lucas smiled every time he rolled past it. It was late afternoon when it happened. Emily was digging through Lucas's storage cabinet looking for stamps to complete a thank you letter to God when she found the small, cracked wooden box. "Hey!" she called out. "This yours?" Lucas looked up from the piano bench. His legs were strapped into mobility braces now, just for balance. He recognized the box instantly. "Don't open that." Emily's hand froze on the latch. "Sorry." But Lucas was already moving toward her, slowly, unsteadily. "It's okay. I haven't seen that in years." Rachel watched from the hallway, sensing something unspoken in his voice. Lucas sat beside Emily on the carpet. "This box belonged to my father." Emily tilted her head. "What was he like?" Lucas hesitated, then opened the box. Inside, old dog tags, a flight pin, a faded photo of a man in Navy uniform, and a folded letter yellowed by time. Lucas picked up the letter. "I wrote this when I was 17, he said, "but I never sent it." Emily waited. Lucas unfolded it slowly. His fingers trembled. Then he began to read. "Dear Dad, I wish you'd looked at me like I wasn't just a project to fix. I wish you'd come to my concerts. I wish you'd called me son without expecting me to act like you. I don't want your medals. I want your time. You're good at war, but not at love. And I need love more than discipline. Someday I'll build something big. Maybe then you'll see me. But today, I just wish you'd sit next to me in silence and be proud. Lucas." He set the letter down. Rachel's hand was at her lips. Emily, after a long moment, whispered, "He never read it?" Lucas shook his head. "He died a year later in a training flight. The last words he ever said to me were, 'Straighten up.'" Silence fell. Lucas leaned back against the bookshelf. "I built my first company to prove to a dead man that I mattered. Then I kept building, hoping it would silence the boy in me that still wanted a father." Rachel stepped forward, knelt beside him. "Lucas, you don't need to be a son anymore. You're becoming a father." That landed like a revelation. Emily, still holding the photo, looked up at him with wide, clear eyes. "Can I ask something?" "Anything," Lucas said. She took a deep breath. "Would you maybe want to adopt me?" Rachel froze. Lucas blinked. Emily rushed to explain. "I know I'm not a baby. I know I eat too much cereal. But I don't want to keep being the kid who's staying over. I want to be yours. For real. Like, forever, kind of real." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. Lucas swallowed hard. Emily, But he stopped, because for once, he had no answer big enough. Only feeling. He looked at Rachel. She nodded. And then Lucas turned back to the girl who had walked into his mansion offering to sing his legs awake. He placed a hand gently over hers. "I don't know if I'll be a good dad," he said, "but if you'll have me, then yes." Emily threw her arms around his neck. "Then I get to be yours too." And in that moment, amid the clutter of old boxes, unsent letters, and ghosts of broken fatherhood, something was rewritten. Lucas didn't become a father by blood or law. He became a father by choice. Later that night, Rachel found Lucas in the study, staring at the old letter. "Do you regret never sending it?" she asked. He folded it one last time and placed it back in the box. "No, because now I don't have to prove anything to a man who's gone." He looked up at her. "I just have to show up for the one who's here." Rachel stepped closer. "You're not just showing up for Emily, Lucas." He tilted his head. "You're showing up for yourself." They stood in silence, side by side. No romance yet, just respect and something deeper. The beginning of a new kind of family. It started with smoke. Lucas caught the scent first, a faint burn, sharp and chemical. He was in the library helping Emily pick out bedtime stories when the smell curled through the air like a warning. "Is something cooking?" he asked. Emily paused, nose wrinkling. "Smells like burnt rubber." Then came the scream. "Rachel." It rang from the kitchen, sharp and terrified. Lucas's blood went cold. He wheeled into the hallway just as Rachel stumbled out of the kitchen, coughing violently, her eyes streaming. "Fire!" she gasped. "The old wall heater sparked. It caught the curtains." Smoke billowed from behind her. Emily froze. Lucas's mind moved fast. "Emily, go to your room. Grab the emergency bag. You remember the drill?" The girl nodded, bolted upstairs. Lucas turned to Rachel. "You hurt?" She shook her head, still coughing. "No, but it's spreading fast." He wheeled into the kitchen. The flames were climbing the wall, eating through old pine trim, licking toward the ceiling. The fire alarm blared overhead, a screech that seemed to shatter time. He reached for the extinguisher mounted by the pantry, pulled the pin, sprayed, but it wasn't enough. The fire was alive now, hungry. It moved like it had a purpose. Lucas backed out, coughing. Then, a crash upstairs. "Emily!" Rachel cried. Without thinking, she ran toward the staircase. Lucas followed, but then stopped. Because his wheelchair wouldn't climb stairs. He called out, "What happened?" Rachel yelled back, "She slipped. She's okay, but she's trapped by smoke. I can't reach her alone." And just like that, Lucas faced the moment that every fear, every therapy session, every sleepless night had prepared him for. There was no time, no second option, no backup. If he didn't go up those stairs, he'd lose her. He braced both hands on the railing, pressed one foot flat, the other wobbled but held. And then, Lucas Barrett stood. His legs trembled, every muscle screamed, but he stood. And then, he climbed, one step, then another. He nearly collapsed on the third, but a scream from Emily sharpened his resolve. "Lucas!" she sobbed. "It's hot! I can't—" "Hold on, baby girl, I'm coming." Rachel turned at the landing, eyes wide. "You're walking," she gasped. "No," he grunted. "I'm fighting." He made it to the top, every movement pure agony and adrenaline. The smoke was thick, stinging his lungs. He dropped to all fours, crawled toward Emily's room, found her hiding under the desk, shaking. He gathered her in his arms. "I've got you. I've got you." Together they stumbled out, half carrying, half dragging each other down the stairs where Rachel waited, arms open, face streaked with soot and tears. They made it outside just as fire trucks screamed up the snowy drive. Hours later, after the smoke cleared and the fire was put out, they stood in the front yard, wrapped in blankets, watching the damage. Half the kitchen was gone. Smoke had blackened the ceiling, but the house still stood. And more importantly, so did Lucas. He was seated again now, legs bandaged from the strain. But the look in his eyes was different. Not haunted. Awake. Rachel sat beside him. "You walked." He nodded. "I didn't think. I just did." She placed her hand over his. "That's how love works." Emily in Rachel's lap whispered, "I knew you could." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Because you believed, I remembered how." They sat like that as the first rays of dawn broke over the trees, and the fire crews packed their hoses away. The snow had melted in a ring around their feet, and from the ashes of what almost was lost, something else had taken root. Family. Not by blood, not by law, but by fire, by choice, by standing. Together. It was snowing again, but this time it was gentle, like a curtain falling at the end of a long, aching performance. Emily twirled beneath the flurries outside the courthouse steps in Glenwood Springs, her red coat spinning, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Inside Lucas's chest was something he hadn't known in years. Peace. Rachel stood beside him, her hand tucked into his coat sleeve. "She's not nervous," she said softly. Lucas watched the girl they both loved dash between footprints and stone steps. "She's braver than I ever was." Rachel turned to him. "You've walked through fire, Lucas." He chuckled. "And up a staircase." They shared a look, not just warm, but rooted, a kind of knowing. The courthouse doors opened. "Mr. Barrett," the clerk called. "It's time." The hearing was short. Lucas Barrett, former CEO, former recluse, formerly paralyzed, now stood upright in front of Judge Marilyn Keene, the same woman who had presided over his father's military pension settlement 30 years ago. "I read your petition," she said. "Unusual case. You're single. You've got no blood relation to the child, no prior experience parenting. But," she paused, flipping the file closed, "you also ran into a burning house on prosthetic legs for her, and she calls you Dad in her sleep." Emily squeezed Lucas's hand. "I don't see how I can say no." And just like that, with a stroke of a pen and a tear sliding down Lucas's cheek, Emily became his daughter. Rachel's breath caught, her eyes welled. Emily whispered, "Does this mean I have to call you father now?" Lucas smiled. "Only if I get to call you daughter." They left the courthouse, hand in hand. 1 week later, the community center in Aspen opened a small room for music therapy and child rehab, funded anonymously by Barrett Hope Trust. The first class? Taught by Rachel. The first student? Emily, of course. The second? A boy with a prosthetic arm who refused to speak until Emily played her ukulele and whispered, "Your silence is music too." Lucas stood at the door, watching it all unfold. A man who once built companies with capital, now building something else entirely with presence. That night, In the newly restored kitchen, they celebrated. Real lasagna, store-bought cupcakes, too many balloons. Rachel lit a single candle and placed it in the middle of the table. "For what?" Lucas asked. Rachel smiled. "For new things." Emily chimed in. "For beginnings that don't need to forget the past." Lucas looked at both of them, the woman who'd challenged his silence and the child who'd awakened his legs, and then at the candle. He reached for a match, lit the flame himself, and for the first time in his adult life, he said, "I'm home." Somewhere deep in the mountains of Colorado, in a house once filled with echoes and ashes, there now lived a man who stood again, a child who laughed again, and a woman who finally believed she didn't have to do it all alone. They weren't perfect. They were better than that. They were chosen. They were enough. They were family.